Hi, my name is Stanley Chu. I got the idea of personal stories on racism from one of my friends, Danielle, when she shared an article that talked about the results from a survey of 2,000 Americans and their social networks or their friends. And one of the results from the survey was that 75% of white Americans don't have a single friend of color in their social network. I found that astounding. And it goes a long way towards explaining why racism that we have continues to this day and the concept of two Americas. I grew up in and around Chinatown in Chicago. Almost all of my friends until I left Chicago for college were people of color. And of all the white people that I knew in Chicago, all of them had non-white friends. When I went to Valparaiso University, a school 84% white at the time, I could see how it could happen that in a small town for a white person to not have any people of color as friends. But I figured it was due to the idiosyncrasies of Valparaiso University, being a private Lutheran school in a small town. But now I live in a suburb of Houston with a population of 100,000. That is 80% white. I didn't think that racism awareness was a problem because we're next to one of the most diverse cities in America. And I haven't faced any overt racism in the 6 years that I've been in the Houston area. Then a fortuitous thing happened. The League City government felt compelled to publish on Nextdoor, a social media website that limits your network to your neighborhood or your community, your large community, that Black Lives Matter protests would be happening in League City, and that they were aware of it, and that they would be managing them. Nextdoor normally doesn't allow political discussion, but because the topic of this post was inherently political, the floodgates were open to my neighbors to express their normally suppressed views on race. It was probably the most commented post on Nextdoor in this region ever. In just 2 days, the post had 400 comments on it. That there was a normal conservative liberal divide. Conservatives were afraid that the Black Lives Matter protesters were going to bring violence and Antifa was going to come to town. The liberals generally support the protests. But what stood out to me and made me want to do this video was that some of my neighbors claimed to be colorblind, or said that League City is not racist, and so we shouldn't have these protests. I've never heard a person of color claim to be colorblind, and that's because we know that the color of a person's skin in part defines that person's experience in America. People of color have seen and felt racism from a very young age. So they know it's important to take a person's race into account when interacting with them. To us, saying that you're colorblind or that we should be colorblind is as ridiculous as saying that we should be sex blind. It's as ridiculous as if I were LeBron James's friend and I said to LeBron, hey Bron, how's your period this month? I would be destroyed in a second. The news would read, on June 15th, Stanley Chu said something that cannot be repeated here to LeBron James. And that was the end of Stanley Chu. In other news, LeBron James wins Western Conference Player of the Month. We should see race because to deny it would be denying that person's history and experiences. For example, if you were a white person and you displayed a Confederate flag in front of another white person, It is possible that that white person would be somewhat sympathetic to the historical symbolism of the flag, while still thinking that you are insensitive. If you were to display the same flag, the same Confederate flag, to a black person, the only reasonable response you should expect is their disgust and anger. Similarly, if you were to do mock kung fu moves and Bruce Lee calls to your non-Asian friends, they might find it slightly amusing, whilst thinking that you are very crude. But if you were to do the same thing in front of me, you'd be triggering some painful childhood memories and loss of respect for you. So don't say that you're colorblind. Actually, if you really believe it, keep saying it. Because then hopefully someone close to you who is a little bit more aware of race will hear it and make you watch 100 hours of these videos. Now that we're clear that we should see race, it's everyone's job to understand how racism is rooted in society, to reflect on your own views on race, and to offset the harmful effects of it. This is where this video series, Personal Stories on Racism, comes in. Racism affects almost every part of society. Proper English is how whites speak it. Your race affects how you are policed, educated, tipped at a restaurant, the type of houses your realtor will show you, your chances that an employer will call you back, how long you will wait in line to vote. I will share my experience with racism, and then tag a few people to share theirs, and then those people will tag some more people. It's like the ice bucket challenge for racism, the racism bucket challenge. Actually, that's a terrible idea. I'm not going to call it, but that's a bad name for it. I don't want you to do increasingly ridiculous racist things with each video. But you get the idea. The goal is to keep expanding the stories with each round until those 75% of Americans who don't have a friend of color will recognize someone that they know in their community talk concretely about race. If this series is successful, it will help Americans see through the lens of people that they know and can relate with, how racism manifests in millions of different ways to shape our lives and society. Here are the rules. You have to share personal, authentic, raw stories about what shaped your views on race, your experience with racism, and how you deal with your racism today. Personal means your own stories, not those that happened to someone else. Authentic means that the events and feelings actually happened. And raw means no sugarcoating. I realize that I can be franker about my experiences because besides my mom and my grandparents, I haven't put anyone in a bad light. My mom is retired, so there's no fear of employer retribution. She's not on English language social media, so she'll probably never see this, and even if she did, she wouldn't understand what I'm saying. Her friends already know that she's racist. As I said before, she's in my video that she's very explicit with her racism, and her friends were fine with it. And my grandma, she's 90 years old, and she doesn't care what other people think of her at this point. She just wants to live another day with less pain. You may not be able to be so frank because your stories might harm the relationships of people who are your family and friends. In this case, you can say family or friend instead of naming a specific individual. If you can't meet these 3 rules because you're afraid your employer or your friends can't handle meaningful conversations on race, then change employers and friends, and then do a video. Last rule, at the end of your video, tag 3 to 4 people to share their stories of racism. Post your video on a platform that doesn't require an account to view the video, so not Facebook, and make it public so that everyone can see it. For the title of the video, use your real name and then add personal stories on racism or hashtag PSOR so that it's easy to find online. And then after it's posted, send a link of the video where you grew up and where you are now to personalstoriesonracism@gmail.com. If this series is successful, I'll create a website with a map that has pins and links to each person's story so that people who want to see stories of other people in their area can easily find them. I'm really looking forward to hearing the stories that you will tell.